Welcome back, everybody, to the Roots and Streams podcast. Roots and Streams podcast. I am your host, Matthew Yamas. Those things are separate now. It's a little weird. Hopefully you all are not like, Matt, what are you thinking? The name was fine. I mean, I had a friend tell me, the Matthew Yamas podcast, Matthew Yamas, it sounds fine. But just something about, like I mentioned, just using my name wasn't working. So hopefully you got to listen to the update episode, the last one. I'll just call it episode 6, and this will be episode 7. Dropped it on Friday, on Black Friday, right after Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. I know it's like after, but still, hopefully you had a happy Thanksgiving and everything went well. I know I had quite a busy Thanksgiving holiday. On the day of Thanksgiving, I was at like uncles, with my uncles and aunts and cousins. And, it was very timely because after that grief episode, like I mentioned, we're grieving the passing of my Nina. And, really got to applaud my family for really leaning into the grief. And I think that there was so much love for my Nina that, we're just having that prayer and lighting candles and just reminiscing. And it was just beautiful to see everybody there to really honor her, talk about her, and just lean into this grieving process that we're still going through. And so the very next day, then I spent Thanksgiving at my mom's house, so more food. There was a ton of food on Thanksgiving Day because then actually, I forgot to mention that. So we hosted here at my house, my in-laws. So I went to my aunt's house for a little bit. Then we hosted here. So ate both those times. Then on Friday, ate at my mom's house. Then on Saturday, my family had they kill a pig every year, or they try to. It's been hit or miss, but this year they're trying to bring back that tradition. So I helped cook and prepare for that pig party, I guess, or they just call it the pig. That was a whole lot of fun. Just cooking up some carnitas and chicharrón and tripas. It was a big party, so it was just a whole weekend of just eating and celebration. And then it was my brother-in-law's birthday, and then it was Sandra's birthday on Monday. So we've had a lot to celebrate. I haven't been hungry for like a week now, but I am so grateful. And so hopefully you got to hear a little bit of kind of the reasons why I changed the name of the podcast. I may be fumbling a little bit, and so hopefully you can find your way to any content that I'm creating. It has an IG page now, and I know I told a lot of people, so maybe first and foremost, that there would be a guest today. So he came down with something. He's feeling under the weather. He really wanted to be here, but it sounds like it's gonna have to be for next week. Which I thought was fine. I totally would have loved to have him on here. Charles Corona, just telling his testimony, his story. Now I know I've shared it with a couple people, and they're excited to hear that, and I'm excited to have the episode as well. And I've been feeling some stuff stir up in my spirit, stir up in my mind, that I want to share as well. So I was kind of hoping to have a solo episode. But I would have totally been okay if Charles would have come on. And it sounds like he's still going to be available to come on next week. So, hey, it's God's timing. So that was my Thanksgiving, my weekend. Again, the changes, bear with me. I finally created from a recommendation, and I know I should have been, but now I'm going like full on influencer mode and having a link tree. I don't know how I feel about that, but I get it. It makes things more organized. You can click on that link on my Instagram page and you can find all of the links. And I know that's been needed. I'm trying to get more organized, make things look a little bit more polished, a little easier to navigate. So that's that. I think that's it for kind of just the nuts and bolts of things. Topic I'm getting in today, you may or may not, I definitely was not aware of this until very recently. So I'm going to stay on the topic of mental health. And it's on the topic of that is attachment styles. Um, I didn't hear anyone talk about this. So I would imagine almost everybody listening to this has never heard of this. But in hearing it and learning more about it, and becoming aware of it has been pretty big shift in my just being aware of things I do and how I do them and the impact they have on other people. So I want to jump into that and just talk a little bit how, right, that helped me be aware of something that I was being a conduit of. And I think oftentimes we're conduits of so many things, of past hurts, past pains from tens and 50s and hundreds of years ago. Things can be passed down, traumas and just traits and hurts and pains. But, also we can pass down security and joy and happiness. So I think oftentimes when we just think, oh, I am who I am and this is how I am and just accept it, I think to some extent that there is some health with that. There's a healthy amount of that. But also, I know for me, it's been becoming more aware what I'm not aware of. And even that's been difficult, especially without talking to somebody. So as you all know, and I've talked about here, I am regularly going to therapy, took a break over Thanksgiving, but I'll be back in it tomorrow. Today's Wednesday. I know this is dropping Friday. So just in case you haven't found the pattern yet, I'm dropping episodes Friday morning at 9 a.m. And that's when they'll become available. But I'm usually recording somewhere in between the week, doing edits, trying to make shorts now. But back on topic is, thinking of being a conduit of something made me remember this constant and ongoing, not lately, but it seemed to be ongoing throughout the summer at Costco. So, very much an adulting thing, right? When Costco becomes like, I think I'm known for saying how Costco is my second favorite place in the world. They're like, why the second favorite place? Well, like it just can't be my first because it's just like a grocery store, but it's definitely like up there. I just don't know what the first is, but I got to put it second because it just can't be the first. Especially in their heyday of the samples, and they're somehow been able to keep their prices low. This is not a sponsorship for Costco, but I am a big fan. The samples aren't the same as they used to be anymore, but man, they still keep them prices the same. I have no idea how. And so at Costco, especially for me lately, and maybe it's just this one store, but it's the one I frequent, the one in Pacoima here local to me, that every time, and I don't know what it was, but there was every time we would get a cart and we'd walk through Costco, we'd pick up so much static electricity. At least it seemed like whoever was pushing the cart. And please tell me that there's somebody else out there that is going to this Costco and it's like, yeah, you're not crazy. That happens to us too. Because it was just constant. Every time we'd go into Costco, we're pushing the cart, just picking up static electricity. And if you know what happens when you pick up some static electricity into you and you charge yourself a little bit, well, everything you touch and every person you touch, you're going to shock them and shock yourselves. And it's kind of painful and kind of annoying and kind of surprising and scary and makes you tap everything. So this was happening so often, and I was trying to figure out like what is causing this static buildup. Like, I don't get it. It's only happening here at Costco, and typically it was a person pushing the cart, and sometimes you wouldn't even push anything. Like, you would just feel the cart shock you. And I thought, okay, maybe it's my shoes. I feel like my shoes, like the way they rub on the floor, it's maybe just picking up some electricity from Costco. You're right. So I changed my shoes. Next time I go, still picking up electricity, still shocking. Like my poor daughter, Gabby, I would shock her and she's crying. I'm like, I don't know what to do. And usually the Costco run is not a run at all. It's more of a Costco walk. So imagine how many times, I was shocking myself on the doors of things and on people. So it wasn't the shoes. And I thought, okay, maybe it's like the sun. And I think this still may be it, but it might be the sun kind of putting electric charge when it's really hot into the carts or something. Or I would even like try to walk different. Like I couldn't figure it out. And it was so frustrating because I couldn't figure out how this electricity, right? How was I being a conduit of this electricity and shocking other things in myself and other people? And that story came up when I was thinking about this topic of attachment styles and how, it makes us a conduit of just of different things that have happened to us. Mainly, kind of what has happened. What I've learned is that this comes from typically like the first 2 years of life. And you're like, Matthew, well, what is it? What is this attachment styles? I think in the name kind of itself. And again, this is like I got to put disclaimer every time. I am not like a psychologist. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm just a person reading some books, learning about himself, and sharing my experience. It may be completely different for you. But I'm just sharing my experience, and it might, bring some things up for you. And you may receive some understanding, and that's my hope, and maybe dive into it and you didn't know before. You may hear my family. I can kind of hear them, so there are people definitely home. But in that like similar way that like at Costco, I'm being a conduit of this electric charge in this cart, or it felt like of the store, like there was no way out of this electric charge. Like attachment style. So let's dive into this for a bit. So let me try to do my best to kind of explain what it is, and then I'll share my experience. I feel like that order kind of makes sense instead of just telling you all of my experience. So hopefully this works out. So attachment styles, I have notes here. You'll see me looking at them because again, I'm not an expert at this. So attachment styles, there are secure attachment. There's only one secure attachment style, right? And that's just being a secure child. And then you grow up to be a secure adult. And sometimes that can change based on traumas and things that happen even after 2 years old. It's not only things that happen before year two, just from research that I have read in the book that I'm reading, seems to be the most impactful time. Then there's insecure attachment styles. Now here's where we get, the flavors. There are 3 attachment styles. I think more recent research and understandings and deeper dives have kind of like almost a spectrum of them and different wording for them. But the most common ones that you'll hear is of attachment styles is an insecure anxious style, insecure avoidant style, and insecure disorganized style. So this study, I'm terrible at history, so I'm going to try here. This study is from a British guy named John Bowlby, or Bowlby. I think I'm saying that right. And this took place in the 60s and 70s, and he started observing children who were separated from their families and parents from World War II, and started to notice like some patterns of anxiety or just not being in touch with emotions, or just certain traits and that they had, post-war, and what the impact it had on them in being disconnected or in traumatic situations from world wars. And I would imagine that there is a lot of, negative impacts, right? It almost goes without saying, from wars, because the impact it has on large groups of people, of families, of the fear it just injects into a society. So I would think from the history, of mankind, that wars definitely have kind of a ripple effect. And so they talk about studies of they did on children, young children around the age of 2, where they would the mother would go in with the child, and they would put them down, and there was like a bunch of toys for them to play with, and then they like kind of just put a stranger in the room. um just kind of a weird thing. It's called like the stranger study or something like that. The stranger in the room study. So the mother would drop off the kid with all these toys there to hopefully, maybe they'd want to play with some of them, and they would start interacting with the toys, and then the mother would leave for a period of time, and then they would observe how the child would react to the mother leaving, and then and how they would react to the mother returning. And so they saw these different patterns. So the secure one, so usually the secure one, the child oftentimes would, become maybe a little fearful. There's a stranger in the room, and that was totally normal. And then the mother would come back, and then the mother would console, and then they would calm down, and then they would go back and start to play again. So this is usually, when you have a secure pattern, is associated with freedom as an adult. Like, you're free to try things. You feel free to, quit things. You feel free to just explore the world, and the world is a safe place. And you just feel free. And, you know that when you were just like disconnected maybe from something, that yes, you may get emotional, but then you can kind of console yourself and or find comfort maybe in somebody. And then, you kind of can recenter yourself. So that's the secure one. And then they saw these other attachments, and I'm going to totally like hack these explanations because I'm just going based off of memory. I try to write down as best as I can. With the anxious one, right, when the mother would leave, the child would, it's actually anxious and ambivalent. So both of these things could either happen. They can become anxious or ambivalent. And so the mother would leave, and the child would become anxious. And when the mother would console the child, oftentimes it had a very difficult time calming itself down. So the baby would just, it just would not be able to, right? So the secure one gets anxious or it's scared that the stranger's in the room. I'm by myself. My mom's gone. Mom comes back. I'm good. With the anxious child, usually they could not console. They could not be comforted. They just kind of couldn't figure out how to calm themselves down. And then the avoidant, usually sometimes this one, from what I remember, just either wouldn't have any emotions. And often when the mother came back, sometimes they wouldn't even go to the mother. They didn't find comfort in the mother. And then there's the disorganized, unresolved. So this one is usually associated with unresolved trauma, and has been the kind of most complicated one for people who are studying these attachment styles. And it's usually rooted in unresolved trauma. And this is probably the one that had the most anxiety and emotional like reactions when they were left alone. And I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to try to do a better explanation. But the way they show up usually in us as adults is that in the anxious one, we become preoccupied. And I very much so identify with, and so learning this is, I think primarily, I know my attachment style is an anxious attachment style. With avoidant is, as an adult, you become dismissive of emotions. And oftentimes in the household, my emotions weren't, seen as important or needed. And then you grow up and you think, well, the world is an emotionally barren place, right? There's no need for emotion, and you don't pay attention to other people's emotions, and you don't necessarily pay attention to your own emotions, right? And when they do happen, it can be overwhelming, and you can find yourself saying, I need to push away from that. That person's crying. That's kind of uncomfortable. Yeah, I can't handle it. And you kind of push away. So that's typically a sign of you might have an avoidant Not to say everybody, this is not everybody and everything, right? This may just be the mood that you have that day. By all means, I am just encouraging the exploration of this. Usually anxious, like I said, is the one I connect with. Usually shows up from experiencing inconsistency or intrusiveness from your parents. And you can get consumed with anxiety. And oftentimes, for me, in this journey of even a podcast, noticing that like I have a disjointed mind and stories sometimes. So really trying to be more aware of that, because I know with myself, my sharing ideas and stories, and even in presentations, my mind can become really disjointed. And there's, long stories for why, maybe these existed. And, want to share a little bit here. And I know it is personal, and I do want to get to a point where I can share more and more of my personal story. And actually, before I end, I want to say disorganized. Kind of want to stay on point. So usually as a baby, they're unconsolable, and they find the world to be a frightening place, right? And sometimes as an adult, they can become impulsive, excessive behaviors, right? And they just don't feel like the world is a very safe place. And for whatever reason, they experience traumas that are telling them the world is not a safe place. Bad things are going to happen, right? And it's just not safe at all. So sharing a little bit about myself, I know, for many reasons, and obviously, I can't really avoid it. I was grown up by a single mother, wasn't single like the whole time. And just want to first and foremost and say, mom is an amazing mom. I do definitely want to be sure that I honor her on, this podcast, and just as I become more aware of where I am and how I grew up and things I experienced. I know my mom really went through a lot, and she did her best and was just hit by so many things. And so the fact that I'm even here sharing with you all, and I have like enough mental health, or at least seek for it, because she's I know she's a big part of that. And so first and foremost, just want to definitely thank her, for just protecting, me, and just the way, the way she really did everything she could. Right. And and our parents do the best they can. And with that said, from my understanding, I know there was a lot going on the first 2 years of my life. And I know my dad was like in and out of my life, and my parents got like divorced around that time. So I'd imagine there was some like inconsistency. And, one of the explanations, in there is about like experiencing your parents in a way that's inconsistent. And so sometimes when it's inconsistent, as a parent myself, I know like, okay, I haven't been around, my son that often. And so I want to show him as much love as possible, and he may just be wanting to chill on his iPad. And I just come with all this love and affection, and it kind of intrudes on his space. And I know it's like coming from a place of love and a place of like, I want to show affection, but it sounds like, like when a baby's playing by themselves and they're totally like secure and fine, that sometimes when we intrude and we're not being in tune with their need, it's a big word like that gets repeated, is like being in tune with the child. They can take that as like, oh, I'm not sure what to expect of the world. Oh, like I thought, I was just chilling by myself, and now like all of this like affection or just things are coming at me, and it can cause like that anxiousness. And I wasn't necessarily there when I was 2, and I know I want to learn more. And I'm kind of going deeper into that, even learning more about my family and with my mom. So, just giving a little bit of background for me, because I want to share kind of like my learning of and being aware of my anxious attachment style. But as a parent, kind of what I was talking about is, so being tuned in with your child's needs. For me, this has been something that has gotten better throughout the years. I have 4 children. There's a big gap, as I've shared. So I have 14, 11-year-old, and now a 2-year-old and a 5-month-old. So there's been, enough room to learn and to start to be able to be more in tune with my children and their needs. And that's a big part. So if you're a parent, one important, and I'm finding really beneficial, is of this attachment style stuff is the importance of kind of paying attention to your child's needs. And sometimes it's difficult, I know, for some other, or more than others, of like, do they need to be held right now? Do they want to play right now? Like, are they hungry? Or do they just want to go? Do they want to go outside? Do they need to cry? And these can be very confusing things, especially if we're not in tune with ourselves emotionally. We don't know how to read them in other people. And I've had to learn, I think it started with, a little bit knowing from my first kids, but definitely the second wave of kids. Like, I know, I'll just say one of my kids definitely needs to cry sometimes. And becoming aware of that was very freeing. Instead of always saying, like, trying to pacify her or getting frustrated, it was just, you know what? Sometimes she just needs to cry, and that's okay. You're sad. I know you're sad, or you're frustrated, and maybe naming the emotion and giving them space and time to feel those emotions, and me being okay with it, because I'd imagined, as if we're just trying to pacify it or saying stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about, right? That may, I'm not an expert, like, they may create, though, in my head, makes sense, like an avoidant, right? Avoidant attachment style, where like my emotions are not valid. My emotions are not safe. I'm being told to not express them and to kind of just get out of them as soon as possible. So as a parent, I'm trying to be, more aware of that, and in learning that I should be more in tune with my kids. That can create some anxiety of itself, but a little note here that I was sure to write down, to hopefully this doesn't make anyone anxious, including myself, is that they found in research that even the most sensitive, in-tuned parents, right, raising secure children, were only in tune maybe at the most 45 to 50% of the time, right? So like half the time, it's okay if you're not in tune. I'm not saying, slack off, but hopefully that sounds, like a little bit more feasible. And that's the most, those are the parents that they were just doing A+ job. They were in tuned, 50 or less % of the time, 50 to 45 is what it said. And I think also being in tuned for yourself, and probably even more importantly, now that I think about it, is being in tune with yourself. And that's really been my journey, is trying to find healing for myself, being in tune with myself, so that it can then ripple out to others. And actually, I see it happening. And I'm going to continue down it. It hasn't been 100% easy. It's not always comfortable. But I am on this road to finding healing, so we can experience more joy, more peace, right? And just more love for myself and my relationship with God, and for my children and my family extended. So yes, being in tune with your needs, that can affect, right? It goes back to the probably redundant, example of what they tell you in an airplane, is that if there's something happens, right, that to put the oxygen mask on yourself before you put it on others, right? Before you put on your kids, right? Because you have to stabilize yourself before you can help somebody else. So just throwing that out there again, because I think that's a pretty good example. And maybe bring it to like a spiritual importance, is that oftentimes our attachment style can affect even our relationship with God. It may sound kind of crazy, and it's something that makes sense to me. Who knows? Maybe it's not true. Maybe it's completely wrong. And I do think that God can definitely surpass anything, any kind of anxiousness or right, and meet us where we are. But like I've experienced and I'm working on my day-to-day experience with God, and actually lately the last couple weeks, maybe not as much just with the business of everything, but then when I first started before this podcast and during, definitely spending more time becoming more in tuned with myself and spending time with God. And as we can kind of heal some of the insecurities or approach them and become more aware of them, that sometimes they can affect our experience and our relationship with God, and what are our assumptions about the kind of God he is. And maybe, he's a God that doesn't want to hear my emotions. He just wants to hear that I'm, not sinning. He just wants to know that, giving. And I would challenge that and say he's very much one that wants to feel what you're feeling, and he wants to get, into all of the tears and happiness and everything. And it all matters. Not just like the things that you're doing. Or you might think like God doesn't, or I don't, emotions have nothing to do with this. Or you think that, emotions have too much to do with it. You're like, oh no, I feel bad. And, God's mad at me, and you don't know how to deal with that. It may be a host of things, but I dare to say, that not being aware of some of those attachment style things that come from that are, those anxiety and just being dismissive, can really affect our relationship with God. So, I would go as far as saying, it's that important, especially if you're somebody who is a believer and trying to work on your relationship with God. I think, it may be important for you to, as well, to dive into that, because, one other thing is that if that's not enough, is that, maybe this may make you a little bit more anxious, like me. Is that in the study, they predict that with 80% confidence that they can predict the attachment style that your child has based on your own attachment style, right, to your parents, and what you display in the way you hold yourself and the way you act. So I thought that was really high, and that was really interesting, because like 80%, that sounds like, things are really being passed down from traumas. And so in that, I mentioned like my mom and things, it's not even her, it's like, and this study came back from world wars, right? So this has been echoed, and things that have been carried on for years and years, and generations and generations. And I think as we, as a currently, and my hope, right, and the reason why I'm part of this podcast, is that we can become aware of these things and maybe work on at least passing down them less, and hopefully maybe not passing down or challenging them. So our children can be, a more joyful, secure, patient generation, right? So we're just trying, and I know most parents, right, they want the best for their kids, and I want the best for my kids, and my mom wanted the best for me. And so, but it all takes, right, going back to the Costco story, is becoming aware, right? If I was able to figure out what exactly was the thing that was causing that electricity to build up in me, and then me shocking others, I would definitely change that. I still haven't figured it out. It did go away, actually, now that it's colder. So I think my theory is right about the summertime sun being, because it was super hot this summer. But that's kind of like out of my control. That's a whole other topic. So like a whole other, like maybe deep dive. But back to this one, the attachment styles, me becoming aware. And I want to share some of the things that I noticed and I'm noticing. So one, I read about it, right, in the book that I've talked about a couple times here, the anatomy of the soul. And it brings it in, and because it's all about neuroscience, and connecting to the Bible, and so that's a part of like this, the research in neuroscience is the attachment style, And so learning about it there, and then it came up in therapy sessions, and it was kind of confirming for me, because as I read the anxious style, it's like, oh, those sounds like things that I exhibit, that I am experiencing. And the more I am being self-aware and paying attention to myself, the more I'm realizing that I have quite a bit of anxiety. I don't feel like it's like intense anxiety. I always would hear other people share with me how they're experiencing anxiety, and they have like anxiety attacks. Like I don't feel like I've ever really had that intense of anxiety. And I don't really recall, right? Like prior to this year, the anxiety, but I think it just might be that I learned to live with it. Like it was like a mild anxiety that was just always there. And I just would push through it, and it was like mild enough that I would push through it. And it kind of built up during, the birth of my child, in June, me laying myself off of work and not knowing what's coming next. And then, with my Nina passing, all these things that kind of built up, and working on my own mental health, my relationship with my wife. I think as those things built up, it really, the anxiety did become more intense, and I became aware of it, feeling it in my chest. And I was like, this has to be because I would hear people explain it, and they would talk about what they feel in their chest. And, I became very aware of it. And so since then I have been more in tuned. And even when I feel like that slight bit of anxiousness, and anxiety, I become aware of it. And, I think that's, so just a part of what I'm sharing. And then, so as I became aware of it, I started reflecting back on things that I've done, at least, this is probably within the last 5 years or so. And what may have been connected to my insecure, anxious attachment style. That's something that's kind of, that I experience, based on, again, I'm not trying to shame or blame anyone here, right? But it seems to have come from me, the way I was brought up. And even that, I'm sure my mom was not like aware or anything like that. And again, it probably echoed down, before her. But it's my responsibility now to become aware of it. And what am I going to do about it? Right. And so in hearing that, I'm hoping that maybe some of the descriptions that you've heard, maybe, and so, gonna give another stat, is that I read that something like 48% of the population, experiences an insecure attachment style. So, hey, at least it's not the majority, right? And like 50% or plus, are secure. And even having relationships with people who are secure, can be helpful. And I will get to like the other side of this, right? Some examples, but just kind of sharing my journey through this and learning. So things that I'm noticing, that I recently noticed that when I get anxious, right? And so one of those traits was, being preoccupied. So the anxiety can cause us to be preoccupied. And I'm like, yeah, definitely for me, a coping mechanism was to like do something if something really, stressful was happening in my life. And I became first aware of that during COVID. During COVID, gyms were closed down, and me and my wife, we worked out a lot. And so we're like, well, let's start, buying some equipment. And it was, if you were on the market during COVID, that it was very expensive, and, because gyms were closing down. And so it was difficult. So we shopped around a lot. And it was the same time though that, my second daughter, Gabriella, was being born. And, there was so many changes to my life, because I would usually work from home and it's fairly peaceful, but now everybody's at home. My kids are doing school from home. I have a third baby on the way. And when she's like is around the same time. So she's getting close to being born, and I start this huge project, and I drag a couple friends into it with me. I start this huge project of redesigning my backyard and making it into a garden. It was just all cement before. Used to have a basketball court back there. And I create like a whole layout, like sketch it out. Have a, it was really cool. I thought it was, and I showed other people. They thought it was a cool idea. It took a fair amount of, destruction and hiring people. And so even prior to the baby coming, what do they say? It's like nesting. Maybe I was like partially is like nesting, but dealing with that anxiety of that big change that was about to happen. I didn't really feel like it was because of that, but now looking back, it must be, right? I can't go back and really emotionally pull myself into what I was feeling and stop and feel everything. And yeah, it's connected, but just observing and looking back on that, because even once, like the day, this is funny. So even the day my wife was going into labor, my gosh. So we had this big root, right? This giant, like Stranger Things root that was back there, and it was under the ground, and I had to get it out because it was from this big old tree that was back there. So Mario was back there with me. So 818 and his friend Gold Class, they're both detailers. So, you got to call them by their company names. So 818 and Gold Class were out there. And really shout out to them, and huge thanks and appreciation, because, they brought tools and we were like just chopping away, breaking up this thing for like a good day and a half or so. And it was pretty hot because she was born in June. And so the day, like we were almost done with the root, was the same day my wife started to go into labor. And as she was like starting to like get contractions, she was just like, it's fine, just go finish the root, go finish outside. And she was handling it on her own. And it wasn't until like my kids called me like, hey, you gotta help out mom, and what's up with your priorities? And it was true. Like I was so like avoiding it and being and preoccupying myself in this other thing that I felt justified. I felt like, I'm trying to finish this project, and it is going to be, it's good for the house. But I also wasn't like pushing myself to be there with Sandra. But at that point, once I kind of snapped out of it, and 818 and Gold Class were like, we're going to take care of it. So, and they did, they got out that route. It was pretty awesome. Like they took me pictures. Cassandra went into labor. Not too long after we got to the hospital, she was pushing, and Gabriella came out, and they're sending me pictures of like, we got the root out. And I was like, awesome. But that was like a huge, so those two examples of, wow, I kind of mixed those up, didn't I? So building the gym during COVID and building a garden when Gabriella was going to be born, right? Of ways that I preoccupy myself. And now looking back, I'm like, whoa, okay, this is how I cope with anxiety. And as I'm kind of working towards being more aware, working on my mental health, right? I'm also talking with my tribe, with my Transformation Church group. And, it had been almost like a year of us talking to each other. And we would talk about the deep things, and we would challenge each other, hold each other accountable. And there was one time where I was just sharing with them like, hey, I think we need to, I can't remember exactly the topic, but I was kind of pushing, I think we need, that's what it was. Like I was working on writing out my whole life story, right, as a part of one of the exercises in the book, of like as many, just, it can be unorganized, whatever, but just in short, I'm working on writing out my whole life story, all the things. It's just one of the challenges in the book. And I was asking them to do the same thing, or just recommending it, or saying, it could be helpful, and then we can share with each other. And I said that, and after we got off the call what I typically do after I have a pretty, what I feel, it could be like a really good, or like share something that I think is kind of sensitive, or I ask of something sensitive. Oftentimes what I do is I get really anxious about it, and I start replaying it back in my head. and saying, did I say that right? What if they thought that? What if they, start to not like me as much anymore? What if they're angry at me right now? Like my head is just, I'm playing all the worst scenarios in my head, and I'm just like getting anxious about it. And I've been trying to get better at quieting that. But in that moment, and after that conversation, I remember texting them and this wasn't the first time I had apologized for something, like, hey, just in case I offended anyone or you took it the wrong way, like, I'm sorry. I know you are all, at your journey at your own pace. And they, just from being with them for a year and just for as humble, open, and transparent as we are with each other, and as much love is in that group, they knew already. They're like, we're good. We are supposed to, like, we are pushing each other. We're all in this group together for these reasons. Like, you're good, Matt. There's nothing to worry about. Calm down. Like, if anyone else, would take that personally, that's on them. Like, we're good here. Pretty much tell me, like, we're good over here. Like, you can calm down. And you know what? And even pushing, I remember it was Keisha. She said something like, she said something like, I'm going to need you to stop questioning your greatness. Like she was almost frustrated with me, in a good way though, in a very good way, of like me getting anxious about, sharing things. And I thought that was very powerful. Like, just her being so outspoken with it, and like, hey, you just, like, we need you to just be comfortable in, like, and be like, work on your secureness, because God has great things for you, and he's doing greatness through you. And so that was very powerful. Like, I remember that, and that was not too long ago. So becoming more aware of how I get anxious right after I talk to people. And honestly, so if you think about it, you can only imagine the anxiety, especially after the first couple of episodes of the things I shared, that I'm thinking of, man, this is what people are saying. And sometimes I'd hear, oh man, people really are saying things, but the majority of it was very positive. And even with it, sometimes it's not enough to pacify all of the anxiety that's going through my head. So again, I'm just giving you kind of all of the things of how I'm aware and really identifying with the anxious attachment. And most recently, and I think this was probably one of the biggest ones, and it was a really breakthrough for me, was noticing a topic that actually, it's on a topic that I talked about in episode 1. If you're familiar and you've been watching, you're familiar with episode 1 about the sexual hibernation. And it was about intimacy, right? Intimacy after a baby. And like I said back then, that was not like the perfect way to deal with it. And I am still on this journey, and I'm still figuring things out. So let me actually take a moment to be like, look, I have a lot more grace and respect for people that do public speaking on podcasts, in a church every Sunday, just any platform. Because I know in my head, at least, I could be critical of the preacher, of the podcaster, of people who are up, just speaking live, and, oh, they should have said this or should have said that. So, we're doing the best we can, right? And I know I may have said things that I even already maybe regret a little bit, not too much here yet. Or I may have changed my stance or learned something. So, one thing I've heard is, once I know better, I'll do better. So I am still trying to know better and do better. And back on the topic of intimacy, is I recently learning in kind of paying attention to my anxiety. And I'll even throw in there, I kind of don't want to throw in this word because it's a whole other topic, but it is kind of connected, like codependency. If you don't know what that is, it's okay. But even noticing that, and that's maybe something I'll probably talk about another episode, another time. It's probably even a little deeper. Though, of kind of my relationship with Sandra. And when I would get anxious, oftentimes, actually, let me just tell you about a moment. I think this would be better. So the story of it. Um, so it was like 2 weeks ago, maybe. I was just feeling off. Just felt like something was off. I don't know. I don't know if it was anxious or frustration or sadness or loneliness. It was just off. I could not pin, like, I just couldn't figure it out. And I kept on trying to like stop myself, but I couldn't. And I shared with Sandra, hey, I'm just feeling off. I don't know what it is. Um, and, typically when I put the 2-year-old down, Sandra's with our 5-month-old, and I'm trying to put the 2-year-old down in a separate room. I'll get kind of like, and I shared with episode 1, anxious about like, okay, let me get her down in time so I could spend time with Sandra. And so I get like, sometimes I get anxious about that, and I'm trying to be better about that. So I'm feeling like just off. Then I go lay with Sandra, and I'm like, oh, I just think I missed you. I'm feeling kind of lonely. I feel better now, like just, hugging and laying with you here. And then talking with my therapist about that the next day, she pointed out, because I think, oh, this is why, because I pointed out how I was like, that the other day, this is the day after, right? So I'm like, oh, yesterday I was feeling like disconnected from Sandra, and I couldn't really figure out like what was the feelings, but I think I was feeling like lonely and disconnected. And she pointed something out that really has changed my perspective, of how me saying I was disconnected pointed out to her that like how it's not true that I'm ever disconnected from my wife, right? And even from a biblical aspect, like and that we are married, we are one, and that whether I am in New York or Italy or China, like we are always connected, whether you're near or far. We're never not connected. And that idea that I kind of allow myself to play out in my head that we're like disconnected and we need to reconnect is not a very healthy one. And it may not make sense to you in just like that thought, but honestly, just hearing that, it changed. Like now when I feel that, I'm like, no, I'm not disconnected from my wife. We're not, because sometimes those thoughts would take me down, like thinking, oh, maybe, this isn't going to work out. And like, just negative thoughts that just would, kind of go like spiral down. But now when that happens, like, wait, no, we're always connected. It's so true. Like we're connected. And so that whole disconnected part, no, throw that out the window. And then she's like, now the anxious part, she was like, well, you need to, she's so good at like not telling me what I need to do. She's very good at kind of like setting something there, allowing me to think about it, and like leaving it up to me. So I can't really remember exactly what she said, but it took me, after it had me reflect on like, okay, how am I navigating like this anxious attachment style and intimacy? And so I had to do a little bit more deep diving, but came to the fact that, true intimacy shouldn't be found in insecurity, right? True intimacy should be found in mutual love and connection. So now when I get anxious or I'm feeling lonely or just like an anxious loneliness or offness, I try to take a moment. I try to breathe, try to center myself before I take any action like that. Because I really try to not go to my wife now when I'm feeling anxious. Because I wholeheartedly am a believer in that now. I was like, wait, that totally makes sense. I was coming to her with all of my anxious intimacy needs. When, like I said, love should be found in mutual trust and mutual love and connection. So now, again, I take a moment, right? If I have a chance to disconnect from whatever's going on in the house, I try to disconnect myself. And sometimes like everything can still be going on, but I'll just kind of like on my own while everything's going on, just try to breathe, try to pause, reflect on, okay, what do I need? What's going on? And if you're spiritual, even prayer. And if you're not, maybe even try prayer and pray. Maybe prayer is a loaded word for you. Just talk to God. God, help me in this moment. God, what do I need? Help direct me. Help calm me down. I find this is a very helpful practice for me. And when I recently did that and feeling like those anxiety emotions and just feeling so uneased, I felt the need to journal. And so I just took out, luckily I have a very smart phone. People call this a dumb phone because it's an Android. But my phone has a stylus, so you don't need a fancy stylus. But I was able to just pull out my phone there and there. I didn't have to go grab anything. And was able to journal and just kind of talk it out on paper. And that really helped me. I think our words are very powerful. And when we kind of can release them either onto paper, even more powerful when we can get somebody to help us reflect on them through a really trusted friend or a therapist, that it's needed. It's so needed. And that helped me to recenter myself and to then go and keep having experiences and interactions with my kids, my wife, my loved ones. And, even beyond that, with my mom, my brothers, my cousins, my friends, everybody, that in a more secure way, because I was able to have a moment and just invite God in, journal, kind of just write, hey, this is how I'm feeling. And I didn't even know what to write, but I just started writing, hey, this is just what I feel. Then it started maybe just making sense, or maybe it'll make less sense, but at least you're taking time to be more in tune with yourself and what you need and the emotions that you're feeling. And I think the more you can do that, at least for me, it's been helpful. Right? For you, it may be something different. And and for me, sometimes it's a walk. I go out. So the garden that I have now, that I built out of, preoccupiedness, hopefully that's a word, can also be something that helps to center me. I go near the trees and I find grasshoppers, and that helps to center me. But I'm aware that, me coping and dealing with that, with very big changes in my life, I usually am building something. So if you ever see me building things, you're like, Matt, what is going on? So maybe you should stop me. If you're close to me in my circle and you see me building a really big thing or taking on a big project, you can stop me and say, hey, what's going on? Are you all right? Because usually it means something stressful is happening in my life. And maybe I need to reflect, and maybe I do need to complete the project, and maybe I do have the okay to complete it. But maybe I should also take a moment. So I'm trying to think of what else. We're about an hour in, and I know there are a couple people like, Matt, give us more than an hour. But I am like running out of notes here. I think that's about it. I will drop, I'll put it in the description. So there's something called the Attachment Project, and it is a free quiz that can help you become aware of possibly what's your attachment style. I invite you to, if you feel like you're at a place where you can become more aware. I understand that, sometimes it's better not knowing, or it feels better not knowing. But I want us to let's go with the theme. Let me try to lean into the theme of like roots and streams, is as we're going down these streams of, parenting and singleness and just career and working with people and being a brother to others and just all of the things that are the streams of life, is that, this attachment style, hopefully it's something that you taking it on helps you to go down, a little bit more smooth, a little bit more secure, and it's not gonna, of course, cure everything, but I think it's one of the things that can maybe help us to notice a little bit more and be in tune with ourselves and start to really change those patterns that we're trying not to replicate, right, in the next generation. And so it really takes becoming aware, right? Aware of what we're being a conduit of and breaking those patterns. right? And if we don't become aware, we don't know that they're there. We just think, we're going at it the best we can, and we are. But I want to challenge you to maybe become aware of your attachment style, and in the attachment, what's it called? The attachment project. There probably is like a paid wall or something, but the quiz is free 100%. And then you can feel free to, if you like the website, I'm sure there's going to be something you could pay for to learn more, or like ChatGPT it, or find a book about it, or talk to your therapist about it and bring it up. Most therapists will know about attachment styles, and talk about ways to earning what I was really learning, like earning a secure attachment, right? Or working towards a more secure attachment, with people, in relationships, with your parents, with God, because it really can echo in how you play out and how you're attached to relationships and people in your life. So I want to encourage you and attach you and challenge you to become aware and start breaking some of those patterns that may be anxiety or avoidance or disorganized, all those just the different insecurities. Because I know I dealt with my own and I'm still dealing with them, but it helps being a little bit more aware. So when something does come up, I can point at it and say, just take a moment and figure out what I need. Or do I need to just journal? Or maybe I am really lonely and I need some human attachment or just human connection. But maybe that could just be hugging my kids, or that could be laying with my wife. But at least I'll approach it more from a secure, mutual love and intimate way, instead of like, oh, I'm anxious, can you please just hold me? And I'm not shaming anyone for that. Obviously you've heard me talk about it, that I've totally been there. But wouldn't it be more beautiful if we can just become aware of these things and start breaking these patterns to teach our kids how to have a more secure relationship with people, and with, hopefully with God as well, and that can echo into their relationship with God as well, and how they see the world in a more loving way, right? Because oftentimes these patterns can help or hurt the way you see the world. And I know that there's oftentimes that we have beliefs and ideas about society, the world, and it could possibly be from the way that we were raised, and we just see the world as a frightening, scary place. So I'm challenging you again and encouraging you, for like the 5th time, I know, I'm sorry, to become aware of these things. This might be something that is connected. And I hope that if your children are young enough, that you becoming aware has a really big impact. And if they're already older, maybe it creates a conversation at least, and then saying how you became aware, and maybe you can help them become aware, and how they can work on it. I don't have all the answers on how to become secure, but hopefully just this can start that journey, and I'm going to, start becoming more aware as well. I think that's all I got for today. So next week, I want to say definitely, I think Charles will heal up. He'll be okay. We'll get his story. I almost want to give you a sneak peek, but I'll wait for it. I don't want to assume all the things that he wants to share, but I know enough about his story that it's a good one. So if you've tuned in this long, as always, I'm very grateful. We're up to like almost 50 subscribers. That's pretty awesome. It's definitely a great milestone for me. Just been excited that whatever this journey's bringing, hopefully you got something from today's episode. Again, thank you for everything. Until next time, you guys. Peace.